Red Sea. So it wasn't just one time that God fought against these spiritual beings of coming from the water. Here refers to all four of them, and God conquers them to allow his people to be redeemed across the Red Sea. So my point is that the Bible is affirming the ancient view that behind destructive things that have happened in our universe is not just natural processes, not just asteroids, not just volcanoes, but that there are spiritual forces working in opposition to God, as well as their spiritual forces, angels, working in cooperation with God, that have formed this planet, and that's why we see so much of the turmoil. I see such demonic beings like the dinosaurs. Where do they come from? I think from the spiritual rebellious beings. And why has the world been destroyed? Because it's been a battleground between the forces of God and the forces of evil, spiritual beings with powers that have revolted against God. And then let's look at Psalms. Psalm 74. So it's not just the prophetic literature of Isaiah, but also the Psalms and Proverbs allude to these as well. We'll take this one. Psalm 74, verse 12. But you, O God, are my king from of old. You bring salvation upon the earth. It was you who split open the sea, by your power. You broke the heads of the monster in the water. Why? It was you who crushed the head of Leviathan. You gave his food to the creatures of the desert. It was you who opened up springs and streams. You dried up forever flowing rivers. The day is yours, and yours also the night. You established the sun and the moon. It was you who set all the boundaries of the earth. You made both summer and winter. So God brought order out of the chaos to where human beings could live on this world, and defeated the spiritual beings, at least defeated them enough that human civilization could develop. So, therefore, the Bible agrees with that particular perspective, that there are spiritual beings with powers in revolt against the Creator God, that cause much trouble and continue to be present, interacting in the creation. The devil is just, or Satan, are just other names later on given to him. But the Old Testament had other names before the Persian name. Now let's go back to Genesis. And we'll pick up a little later, focusing upon human beings. Genesis 1, verse 26. It's just some key things that are God speaking and challenging the views that were accepted in the ancient Near East. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, said to them, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And then chapter 2, verse 15, the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it, or to nurture it. So here we have human beings' role. Remember, in the ancient Near East writings, human beings are only there to serve the gods, do all the hard work the gods don't want to do. There's a king appointed by the god to rule a particular city and area. Well, this biblical view takes issue with that, has a very different view. Number one, human beings, both male and female, are created in God's image. And here's the key. In the ancient world, images, of course, were things made of wood and stone and precious metals that were put in the temples to symbolize the presence of the gods. Well, God made us and placed us here as a symbol of his presence. We're a living presence, images of God. So there's a very different take from the ancient world. They are all, notice, all of us, male and female, are created not only in God's image, but we are also ruling royalty. We're intended to be rulers over the creation. as princes and princesses of God. Royalty. They must fight the spiritual enemies of God in creation to, notice it said, subdue it, which is a warfare view, which means, in nature, what we call nature, there are spiritual forces also at work in those things that work against human beings' survival. Like they're talking now that because of weather patterns, there's a real threat that there's not going to be enough wheat in the world to feed people next year. Russia's become a major supplier, and they've had a terrible drought. So we're always fighting to keep civilization, to feed people, to take care of people. And so we work the land as we subdue the land to bring in livestock and others to make it the way that God intended. We are the rulers over all this creation. Therefore, we're responsible, stewards, managers of this. God holds us accountable for taking care of the creation and the creatures of creation, as well as treating every human being with the dignity that they should have. There are no kings over us.
That's right.
Just one king over us all, and that's God. The rest of us, everybody we meet is royalty. That's their destiny. Mm-hmm. They are princes and princesses of God. That's the biblical view, which contradicted the idea of slaves to the gods, as was the ancient view. And so, we find that they must not only fight the spiritual force of God and creation, do it, work it, care for it, and nurture it. There must also be only one king that is acknowledged, so that we do not allow others to dominate us and have claims of divine kingship, which in the ancient world was common. So everybody ended up serving Pharaoh, or everybody ended up serving the king. Now, number two, the entire recreation account in Genesis describes God building his temple. Listen carefully. Chapter 1 to 2 is a description of God building his temple, where he finally rests on the seventh day. His temple is the entire universe. It's not a little place. Some city has a little temple. The universe is God's temple, where he reigns. That's what Genesis 1 is saying. You read some of the things talking about the foundations of this and putting up the firmament of this. It's talking about constructing a temple. That's not meaning literally that, but it's saying the universe is the place, the full universe, with all its galaxies and stars, planets, is God's temple. He's not restricted to some little location, some little city-state, some little nation-state. That's the picture. And the idea we've often heard that God rested on the Sabbath day. Well, it wasn't rest like he was tired. The idea in the ancient world, you rested once civilization was restored, once the temple was built. So God rested too, just like they did, symbolizing he's at rest and at peace. And he has accomplished what he's intended to accomplish, has turned responsibilities over to human beings. In this account, all image bearers of God to take care of the creation and the creatures in the creation. Now, thirdly, the 7 days are not to be taken literally. How do we know that? Since it was not until the fourth day, according to this account, that the sun appears. And of course, if you're thinking in terms of destruction, and first you see light, you tell the difference in light, darkness, and you begin to see a little bit of the earth, and finally, when the congestion clears, you're finally able by that time to see the sky and the stars. That makes sense in the recreation account. But it's not till the fourth day that you could have a 24-hour day. In the original Hebrew, I bring this up because the translation I have, the International Version glosses over this. The Hebrew in Genesis 2:4 says the entire creation occurred in one day. And here's the King James Version. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. So he says it's made one day. Well, the point is that the day, Yom, is not to be taken in some sort of literalistic sense. And so that just destroys the view that people want to come out. Well, there were 6 consecutive 24-hour days. There's about 5 or 6, 7, 8, 10. The Bible's not trying to make any kind of claim such as that at all. It's not talking about the material creation of the universe per se. And so, in contrast to the crude ways the ancient Near Eastern literature described the creative process, it usually described it as a sexual image by the gods, birth by the gods, and other kinds of things like that. In the Bible, God speaks everything into its place and its function. Take the string theory. God speaks. Through the reverberations of sound, everything is interconnected and God makes what he makes. Fits modern theory if you think about it and reflect on it. In the beginning, there's a beginning. God created the heavens and earth. That speaks well to the Big Bang theory rather than the steady state theory. But now, let us look at what the New Testament has to add to this. Start in the Gospel of John, chapter 1. John 1, verse 1 through 5. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life. How do we get life? Life was inherent within him. And that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. And then verse 14 tells us who the Word is. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So this Word of God from the very beginning that made everything, the spoken Word, that's the presence of Jesus as a part of the creative endeavor of the universe to recreate and to put in its place all things that they function. And then let's look to Hebrews 11, verse 3, which says, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible. That's pretty much the Big Bang right there. Hebrews agrees with that notion. Finally, let us look at Colossians chapter 1, verse 15 through 17. Speaking of Jesus. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. They're in the unseen realm. There are thrones, powers, rulers, authorities, just like there are in the visible realm. All things were created by him, and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So there is some sense in which the presence of God in this vast universe, which is his temple, is still holding everything together in some way, just as ultimately God made this world. Now, for those of you who'd like to explore this more, look at my handout at the bottom. I alluded to a couple of reference books, tried to keep it simple. On the back of the front page. One of them is a book I've already told you about, Reading from Ancient Near East, Primary Sources. And then the book God at War, that basically talks about the warfare worldview, about spiritual beings being at war, a biblical view. And finally, The Lost World of Genesis 1, Ancient Cosmology and the Origins Debate, which I think is a good insight into that particular